Hey guys, how's it going? So today we're going to go over your Chapter 5 end test review that you have tomorrow. So I have a couple of slides here. We've gone over some of these in class, but I just wanted to go over them again. Now how you guys should be doing this is be looking at the slides as I go through them. Pause it right when I get on a new slide. Do it yourself. Then press play, watch me do it, and then see if your answers match up. Alright, so the first question we have here has to do with solving the proportions. So we have two proportions. We have 7 over n and we have 42 over 48. Now there's a couple of ways that you can get from this first number to the second number, and there's a couple of different ways you can find n. One way that will always work is to do the cross product property. In order to do that, you cross just like that, then you multiply what you just circled in. So n times 42 is going to be 42n, and then 7 times 48, you guys would probably have to do multiplication, but I'm going to use my calculator just to make sure that I have the right answer. Let's see here. 7 times 48 is 336. Okay. Now from here we need to solve for n, so we have to divide by 42 on both sides. If we do that, we are left with n is equal to, oh, this is supposed to be 336. We're left with n is equal to 8. Now, another way that you could have done this is, let me erase real quick, is that you can try to figure out how they got from 7 to 42. So when we're talking about proportions, we're using multiplication and division. So how can you get from 7 to 42? You would have to multiply by 8. Or sorry, you would have to multiply by 6, that's what I mean. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out what number multiplied by 6 gets me 48, and that, of course, is 8. So that's two ways to figure out that the answer is 8. So let's do it that second way that I talked about for the next problem. We have x over 2 is equal to 40 over 16. So let's look at the two values that we know, 2 and 16. What can I multiply by 2 to get 16? The answer would, of course, have to be 8, which means over here we need to think about a number that we can multiply by 8 to get 40. So x would have to be equal to 5. Now, if this way doesn't make sense, you can always do the cross product way. You would circle 2 and 40, then you would circle x and 16. Alright, so now this next question asks us to find the slope of the line. So we're going to use our 2 points here. We have point 21 and point 00. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can find the slope. One way is that you can always use the equation rise over run. So you look at how far you go up first. So from get to this point to that point, I go up 1. So that's a positive 1. And then to get to my second point, I have to figure out how far I run, which is another way of saying how far I go left or right. So I go right 2, which means my run is positive 2, because whenever I go to the right, it's positive. So my slope altogether is going to be 1 over 2. Now another way to do it, if you don't want to do it this way, is to use our equation. Remember that our equation is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You take your 2 points, so we have 0, 0, and 2, 1. You label what your y2, y1, x2, and and x1 are. So I'm going to say this 0, 0, that's my 1. So this is going to be my x1, this is going to be my x2, this is going to be my y1, this is going to be my y2. So now when I'm doing the problem, I can just plug numbers in. So I have 1 minus 0 over over x2 Actually, sorry, let me do that again real quick. I put in the wrong numbers by accident. So if I was to do this, I would actually label my points correctly. So this is going to be x1, this is going to be y1, this is going to be x2, that's going to be y2. Now if I plugged it into my equation, I would have 1 minus 0 over 2 minus 0. So I have 1 over 2, so I got the same thing. I got 1 over 2 here, I got 1 over 2 here. Both ways work. Alright, now let's try the second one. We have 4, 1.6, and 5, 2. So whenever my point's not perfect, and by perfect I mean a whole number, I think it's always easiest to use our formula. So our formula again is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to label my points. You can pick either of your points to be x1, it doesn't matter. I'm going to pick this top one to be x1, which means that has to be y1, this has to be x2, that has to be y2. Now when I plug that back into my equation, I'm going to get 1.6 minus 2 over, let's see, we have 4 minus 5. Now remember, you always need to remember your rules for how you find positive and negative numbers. 1.6 minus 2 is negative 0.4, and then 4 minus 5 is negative 1. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so we're just left with 0.4 over 1, or another way to say this is that our slope is just 0.4. Alright, another way you could have done that is you could have done rise over run, so you would go up, you would go over, you would have got the same answer. Okay, so this next question asks us to find and interpret the slope. So we're going to look at our slope here. Well, first of all, we have to look at the table to figure out what our slope's going to be. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this. Just like the last one, you can pick points and make them y2, y1, x2, and x1. So I'm going to take this 20, I'm going to call that my y2, which means this has to be my x2, and I'm going to make this my y1, and I'm going to make this my x1. So if I were to plug that into my equation, I would have 20 minus 10 over 4 minus 2. I would get 10 over 2, which means my slope would be 5. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, we kind of talk about direct variation. So our equation for direct variation is, let me use a different color, is y equals kx, where k is our slope. Okay? So when we were talking about it, we said a way to solve for k is we can divide both sides by x. So then we would just be left with y over x equals k, which is our slope. So when we have y over x, I can take any y value, and then I can take the x value, divide them by each other, and I can get my slope. So let's take this 6 and 30, for example. 30 divided by 6 is 5, which is my slope. It's also my k value. That's what we learned from when we were talking about direct variation. So that's two ways to find the same answer in this type of problem. Another thing that you'll notice is that if you find the slope of each of these points, they're all going to be the same. All right, let's move down. Alright, so for this question, we're asked to find and interpret the slope again. So I'm going to do it what I think is the faster way, and I'm going to take my y value, divide by my x value, so I have 9 divided by 6, which I can take 3 out of that, so I have 3 over 2. That is my slope. Remember, whenever you're finding slope, you have to simplify. You cannot leave it as 9 over 6. You need to simplify it into 3 over 2. Now, the second part of the question asks us to interpret. So we need to interpret what that slope means. So 3, that has to deal with our servings. And this 2 has to deal with packages. Just like when we started out, the 6 was our packages. And the 9 was our servings. So if you're interpreting this slope, all you have to say is something along the lines of, there are 3 servings for every 2 packages. That's what interpreting the slope means. You just need to use the labels and kind of come up with a sentence of what the slope actually means. Alright? Now our last question has to do with, we are showing direct variation. So remember, our formula for direct variation is y equals kx. So what we're trying to figure out is, can we make these equations into y equals kx form? So the first thing I'm going to try to do on this first one is to get y by itself. Right now the minus 9 is bothering it, so I'm going to add 9 on both sides. Put my train tracks, these cross out, I'm left with y is equal to 6 plus 9, which is 15, plus x. And from here I can see whether or not it's direct variation. I can say that it's not direct variation because I have a y-intercept. My y-intercept is 15, okay? Alright, you have reached the point in the video where now you have the chance to get bonus points. If you are still watching and you're listening to what I'm saying, here's what you need to do. Tomorrow in class, when you're taking your test, at the top right of your test, I want you to draw a snowman. Alright? Any snowman you want, draw it pretty small though. And please do not be that person to tell all your friends. Make sure you get the extra credit, make sure they don't. Alright, so at the top right of your paper, on the front page, you're going to draw a snowman, and just keep that little bit of information to yourself. Not everybody needs to know it. Alright, but now back to the math. So, our second equation is x is equal to 5/8 y. This is not in y equals kx form, so I'm going to make it in y equals kx form. But first, I'm going to rewrite it a little bit bigger so we have more room to work with. Alright, so y is on the wrong side. Okay, so first I'm going to switch my equation. So I'm going to have 5/8 y is equal to x. So I really didn't change anything, I just flipped what equation I was starting out with. So now I can get y by itself. Right now, the 5/8 is bothering it, and that 5/8 is being multiplied, so I'm going to divide by 5/8. But instead of dividing by 5/8, I can multiply by the reciprocal, and that's the same thing. So I'm going to multiply by 8 over 5, over here, and over here. When I do that, my 8/5 and 5/8, they cross out, so I'm just left with y. And then over here, I'm left with 8/5 8/5 x. So another question that I could ask you is, what does this 8/5 mean? What is that 8/5? And the correct answer would be this 8/5. That's my slope, which is the same thing as my k value. Okay? And then the other question I would ask you is this direct variation? And we would say no, this is not direct variation because I don't have, you would say yes, that this is direct variation because I don't have anything after the 8/5 x. There's no plus anything, there's no minus anything. We're just left with 8/5 x, where 8/5 is my slope. Okay? Now what I'm going to do for you is there is another question that we were kind of talking about in class. It had to deal with you needing to find the constant of proportionality. Now the constant of proportionality, that's just a fancy word for slope. And it's a fancy word for what your k value is. So we're still trying to find k. How it'll work is I'll give you two numbers. I'll say like y is equal to 10, x is equal to 5. I'll ask you to find me the k value, and then I'll say put that back into an equation. So like we talked about in the past slide, to find a k value, all we have to do is we just take our y value divided by our x value. So here I'm going to take 10, I'm going to divide it by 5. I know that my k value is 2. Now if I have to put that back into this y equals kx form, it's real easy. I'm just going to do y is equal to 2, because that's my k value, then x. That is the answer that you would have to give me. Alright, that concludes today's video. Make sure you watch the video. I should get at least 30 views because I have at least 30 of you in class. Good luck on your test tomorrow, and I'll see you guys then.